G'day, you're listening to the Virtual Staff Room, and this is episode 7, Getting One-to-One. In this episode, we explore the issues that arise when a school starts thinking about going to a one-to-one computing model using laptop computers. And this is an area in which Australia's actually been somewhat of a pioneer. In fact, I believe the Methodist Ladies College in Melbourne was in fact the world's first laptop school. But change like this doesn't happen overnight. It actually takes a lot of planning and thought and, one would hope, some sound pedagogy behind it. So what is actually involved in transitioning a school from a fairly traditional learning environment to one in which students, as knowledge workers, to coin a phrase that we hear a lot of these days, are given laptops as learning tools? Now, I realise this is not a path that every school's going down right now, but I suspect the sort of reasoning behind why some schools have and are introducing these one-to-one programs is worth hearing about. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Paul McMahon, an Australian educator currently living in Hong Kong. Paul's had over 20 years of teaching experience in Perth, London and Hong Kong, and in fact he managed the introduction of a laptop program into All Saints College in Perth when he worked there. At the moment, Paul runs an educational consultancy business based in Hong Kong, and he plans to work with international and local schools in Southeast Asia to ensure that technology is used appropriate for learning. Paul's also been involved in setting up a foundation to assist in the rollout of the $100 laptop program into underprivileged Southeast Asian communities. So he's a busy guy. Anyway, on that note, let's get learning and find out what it takes to get one-to-one. So Paul, I'm working in a school at the moment and we're looking at instituting a laptop program. The principal doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to be pushing pretty hard for it because I'm just seeing so many advantages in having that one-to-one access. And this is a road that you've been down, and so I thought I'd just get you to tell us a little bit about some of the pitfalls and traps that you personally experienced and some of the background to what you did when you were in Perth.
Fabulous, Chris. Thanks very much for the opportunity to have a bit of a chat and to go through it. Obviously, it's near and dear to my heart and something that, even though I'm not involved currently at a one-to-one laptop school, it's something I read about, live, and still have a very strong passion towards. So I guess the first thing I'd kick off with is I think you really need to ask a very, very strong question of why would your school want to embrace a paradigm shift like one-to-one computing for all? This is not an easy move. This is about having kids carrying something that's heavy. It's about having kids use something that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. There's file compatibility issues. There are kids that potentially will be sitting there having games on there, sharing games, sending emails to kids in other classes. There's an absolute myriad of problems. This is an entire culture shift in terms of schooling. So it's not something you go down lightly, and it's something that I was very, very fortunate to have some excellent influences, both internal and external influences around me at the time when All Saints, round about the year 2000, 98, 99, 2000, were toying with the idea of a laptop program. Yeah. I was incredibly fortunate to have Jeff Shaw, who at that time had been working at Camberwell Grammar School in Melbourne under a laptop program. Jeff took the job of the Dean of Curriculum at All Saints College at the time. So as somebody myself who had done a master's in the integration of multimedia into science classrooms and science and maths classrooms, and somebody who'd been bringing in computers and buying digital visualizers myself so that, out of my own pocket, so I could actually have this stuff being used in classes, and running around getting old Apple IIes and putting them in my physics lab because I had a very strong belief that kids should be using this sort of stuff. I then immediately gelled with Jeff, and the two of us sort of became, I guess, people that we could bounce off each other to get ideas as to why we were going to go down this one-to-one computing path.
Melbourne seems to have been the hub of the universe in terms of one-to-one computing. A lot of the early laptop schools seem to come from Melbourne.
They did indeed, and again, the fortunate thing was that Jeff, with his vision, basically said, get out of Perth. You've only got a small perspective here. jump on a plane, go over to Melbourne, start talking to people. And I did, and I was very fortunate to be able to talk to people in Melbourne, to find people like Josie Hopkins at MLC to show me around MLC and what they'd done, to find John, I've forgotten his name now, at St Michael's. You know, there was a million schools I went into, and it was great to be able to meet these people, to talk to them, to get hooked up with some wonderful influences. People like Bruce Dixon, who
I've met Bruce.
Yeah, wonderful guy with a great passion. I don't know whether you've also met Jenny Little, who's his offsider in organising conferences. Jenny is an absolute visionary. She was at Geelong Grammar for a long time. She was the head of their computing program down there when they went one-to-one.
We looked at one-to-one computing back in about 96, 97, and Bruce Dixon actually flew up from Melbourne to the school I was teaching at to have a talk with the principal and myself, and we went a fair way down the path towards almost making it happen, and for one reason or another it didn't at the end. But he's a fascinating guy.
Oh, look, he is. He's an enthused guy. He's a great personal friend of mine as well. So lovely guy. But basically, yeah. As I come back to, try and get that message clear. I mean, I had my reasons for doing it. I'm one of those sort of radical people that believe that that here in Hong Kong, for example, that kids really should be coming in and finding out what it is that's actually causing smoke to come down from Guangzhou province in the north and sort of cloud out Hong Kong most days of the week, and you know, and then to sort of unpack things like why we need a dryer in every apartment, and you know, and using energy and therefore needing more power and burning more brown coal. And I very much believe that to ask those big, weighty, real-world sort of questions, and then to start writing to politicians and doing things like that, that there's one tool that you can look up satellite photos and get those and see what's actually happening there. You can go to the observatory, the Hong Kong observatory pages, and find out about wind speed and wind directions and have a look at all those sort of images. I mean, some real true learning. And I believe for that true learning to take place, you need something that connects, not just when you can book the computer room, but basically every day you need to be connected to this sort of source of information. As I say, what you might then choose to do is create a video that gets campaigns people about using their dryers less, for example. You know, because solar energy in Hong Kong is huge. There's enough there to dry the clothes every day, but we don't even question the fact that we have a dryer inside our houses or our apartments. You know, like big questions like that. That's my standpoint. But it doesn't have to be everybody's, but everybody needs to be jumping on a bus when we go to one-to-one computing. So that vision needs to be shared. Now, as I said, everybody who's on that bus doesn't need to have exactly the same vision as me. You know, you might have a vision that says, I believe that kids need to use computers well because it's a tool for the future. You may not have the radical sorts of views that I have, but at least you're going to board the bus with me because you want to go down that particular pathway. Yeah. Now, if I come back to the All Saints College one, what All Saints College did was we commenced with myself and Jeff, we commenced what we called an enhanced learning program. Now, I then had to concede that I had to put into the rest of the title, it was an enhanced learning program using notebook computers. But to begin with, I wanted to say nothing more than an enhanced learning program, but they wouldn't do it because, you know, basically the parents had to know that it also involved them buying a notebook computer. But to me, I kept coming back to the whole thing. This is not about a notebook computer. If you can give me any other tool that I can access satellite photos, that I can communicate with people, that I can make movies, that I can do whatever, and it's not a computer or a laptop computer, I'm happy to buy it. I'm happy to use it. But what I'm about is enhanced learning in the classroom. Yeah. Now, and creativity and kids doing things that are genuine and real examples. Now, when you start talking that move and that sort of passion, and that's what you want to do, you'll get a lot more people on board rather than just sort of getting out there and saying, I think we should get rid of our our lab computers and put in laptops because it's cheaper or easier, or because we shift the cost to the kids and therefore our infrastructure is what we'll support, or whatever. You know, those are meaningless statements. What you really need to do is have this overarching vision as to why it is you're going down this pathway. And once you've got that vision and you've shared that vision and you've got people on board, the rest of it just naturally falls into place.
Because how did you get everyone on board with that vision? Because I would imagine that the trick there is you're always going to get a percentage of people on the staff of a school that are going to go, yep, that's where I want to go, and follow you, and you're always going to probably get a few that dig their heels in and really don't want to do it.
That's you're right on the ball there, Chris. That's exactly the problem. What you need, I suppose, it comes back to what Bryn Jones, and I know we were talking to Bryn the other day, and I take Bryn Jones's comment on this in terms of critical mass. You have to get critical mass. You've got to accept that there are going to be people that do not share your vision. There are people out there who very much believe that, look, you know, these things are okay, they're well and good as gaming machines, they're very good to get people like you and me talking in Canada and Hong Kong, and they serve a place like that, but they really don't serve a place for learning. What true learning is it comes in books, and kids knowing about Shakespeare, or kids knowing how to solve quadratic equations. That is true learning. And really, you're not going to win that argument. I take a quote from Peter Crawley, who was the head of Trinity, later the head of Knox College in Sydney. And Peter, you know, when I had great conversations with him, he made a statement about dogs don't bark at tombstones. And he was basically saying in that statement that you work with the living. You get with the people that are on board, you deal with them, you celebrate all those good examples that those people do, you say that, you know, even though these kids have gone off the curriculum and even though they're not studying, you know, 50,000 quadratic equations, or that they're not, you know, going through and reading everything and underlining and that sort of stuff, the kids are still doing very, very well in their external examinations because they're switched on, they're motivated, they're switched on to learning. You can then bring those other people around. You deal with the living. You don't bother about those others, but you make sure you've got critical mass. And fortunately for me, at All Saints College, we achieved critical mass. We achieved it very quickly through some great, terrific teachers. It wasn't easy. It was something that we thought a lot about and we put a lot of planning into. One of the first things that we did was we had a couple of areas where we concentrated on, and in particular, it was our Year 8 area. We said, okay, what we're doing in Year 8, which in Western Australia, you've got to realise that Year 8 is the very first year of secondary education, right? Because you've got, you know, the kids go K to 7 in Western Australia. I think that's the same in New South Wales, isn't it?
No,
not K to 6.
K to 6, then 7 to 12. No.
Okay, sorry. But in Western Australia, it was K to 7. So Year 8 was the first year, and what we did in Year 8 was we set up a what did they call it? They didn't want to call it a middle school, so they came up with some other name for it. It's beaten me now. But anyway, what happened was we tried to minimise the number of teacher changes amongst those children. So we had the one teacher teaching them for society and environment, English, and one other lesson, and that teacher was also their homeroom teacher. So they maximised the one teacher.
Were laptops introduced right across the Year 8 cohort?
They were introduced right across the Year 8 cohort. That was our first one. We also did Year 5. Year 5 wasn't a great success at the school. I haven't got time to go into that now, but basically we did Year 5 and Year 8 were our first 2 years. Now, if I just concentrate again at Year 8, the whole Year 8 cohort had to buy them. Prior to that, we did a pilot for 2 years. It involved computing kids. That was more to get the infrastructure sorted out. When the compulsory program came in, it was compulsory for the kids in all the kids in Year 8 and Year 5 to buy them. Now, in Year 8, as I said, we did it very well by changing periods, times, classes, minimising room changes, making sure everything was sorted out. But we also, and far more importantly than any of the infrastructure, we actually made it easy for teachers to nominate and say, I want to be part of the Year 8 team. And we gave them all sorts of incentive. We gave them time off. We gave them PD training for 6 months before the program came in. We freed them up one afternoon a week for 6 months. We gave them a laptop computer. At the time, no other teacher had a laptop computer or was given a laptop computer at the school, but they got their free computer. There was all sorts of bits and pieces to help them come on board. And basically, there were great teachers who chose to be part of that. And you know, that team and that year working with that team, probably the highlight of my years of teaching, because we had energetic teachers, we had visionary teachers, we were sharing a vision, we were walking the talk, we were out there, when you came into the staff room, there was never anybody talking about the football on the weekend as much as we all loved what the Eagles were doing or what the Dockers were doing. Our conversation was about pedagogy. Yeah. We had teachers coming in saying, you should have seen what happened in my Year 8 science classes with the PowerPoints. You should have seen what sort of things these kids put together using, not Mindstorms, what's the name of the logo thing? I'll think of it. No, there's another one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll come back to it in a minute. But basically, these teachers were enthused. We were all enthused. There was an energy that was just incredible there. And we had some great teachers. So
what I'm finding when you do add the ICT element on top of that, you're talking about the stuff that excites you in the classroom there, all the learning that goes on. It's a quantum leap. It's not just let's add some computers and things will be slightly different. It's a quantum leap in the way kids approach the way they think.
Chris, I've always referred to it as an amplifier. It amplifies everything that's been done before. So it amplifies the ability for children to do great work. If you've got a good creative kid in there who in the past went home and made a board game as part of his society and environment project and did a board game where you play modern China and you work around, this kid will now go home and use a tool and will come up with something that is just, it will blow you away what this kid has been able to do. He'll use Flash or something and come up with this amazing interactive thing. But I've got to say, an amplifier is non-discriminatory. So what happens is it amplifies bad behavior as well. So if you've got a kid in there who's distracted, who is not switched on and not particularly engaged in the learning, he doesn't suddenly become engaged. He now has something that is incredibly distractive. He can be playing all sorts of flash games out there on the web when you want him to do his maths work. Yeah. He can be emailing kids in any classroom when he's out there. But, as teachers, we've always dealt with that. We've always had kids passing notes. We've always had this sort of stuff. What you now have, though, is you can't blame the tool. You blame the way in which you're dealing with that kid. You've got to excite him, motivate him, do what you need to do with him.
It struck me the other day. I read something in a blog somewhere, and the point was made that in all these areas of life, as we grow up into being adults and we get a position in the workforce or we own our own business or whatever, we'll have access to computers as tools for doing what we do, be it for communication or for writing letters or for working out budgets or whatever we happen to be using the computers for. They're our tools. And yet we take students who, let's face it, what is a student but a professional knowledge worker? They don't get paid for it, sure, but their profession is knowledge worker. And the tool of the knowledge worker is the computer, and yet we have struggled so much with this idea of giving kids full-time permanent access to the knowledge tool of the 21st century.
You are so right. Look, there's lots of reasons why we resist it.
And one of them is obviously money. And there's going to be a lot of teachers who listen to our talk here and go, it's all right for them in their fancy big private schools. But what about me in my state school? We just don't have the money for that. And there's probably a whole other argument we could or not argument, but line of reasoning we could go down that talks about how schools are funded and how schools need to be funded. But let's not get into that murky water. But that's a harsh reality, isn't it?
You're exactly right. The money is the harsh reality, and really, when it comes back to money, I can understand that. We did certain things at the time of the program where we recognised that. We recognised that even though we were a fairly high fee paying independent school, we still had families that suffered. There were families out there that were on scholarships and things like that where they did not have the money. So we made available second-hand computers at a reduced rate that the parents could rent. This was one of the programs where the parents bought the computer for the child, or bought or rented it, and then the computer came along that way, and we provided the infrastructure. But we, on top of that, we saw second-hand computers, and we, made sure that they worked on our network and everything was fine, and the child got the second-hand computer at a very reduced rate, and for some families that just demonstrated that they could not afford it, we gave them one. But it was a second-hand one. I had a real issue with that because it basically put a little flag in front of the kid who couldn't afford to pay. It produced a real thing in two social groups in the classroom, and we could talk about that over and over. But, suffice to say, there are ways around these barriers. You just need to be creative about them. Yeah. But I'd like to just return to your comment again about the resistance to it and how we're resisting, and how, even though these kids are knowledge workers, we're not going up. I happened to write an article in the paper the other day. There's one particular school here in Hong Kong that's just about to go down the one-to-one technology route. In fact, there are two of them that are looking at it. Again, they're independent schools. They're international schools. They're fairly well resourced, and and there's the same old argument that goes on about the haves and the have-nots. But regardless, they're going down this avenue, and the same old arguments that came out at All Saints are starting to surface now, and a lot of them are incredibly irrational. There's the one about the fact that the kids will have these laptops stolen off them on the train on the way home.
I can't believe how often that argument raises its head.
I can't believe it either, because I'm sitting there thinking, my God, look at the mobile phones and the iPods hanging around these kids' necks. It's going to be so much easier to steal those and so much easier to run off with them, and they're not stealing those at the moment. What's going on? Plus, I don't know if you know Hong Kong, but this is probably the safest city in the world to walk around. It's just unbelievable. So for starters, I can't believe how that one surfaced. But the other one that surfaces all the time is that one about, look, give the kids a little flash disk or a portable hard drive, and they can walk backwards and forwards, and they have their own one-to-one technology.
They
and of course,
don't get it.
They don't get it. Same again. I got into the South China Morning Post. There were two big articles, and about how parents had complained, and schools were now reacting and thinking, yes, well, maybe we'll get portable hard drives for children. So I wrote my great big letter to the editor saying basically, I'd really like one of these parents to respond and tell me what organisation they work in, because I have a couple of friends here that are knowledge workers. They're people like lawyers, they're architects, they're project managers, they're people that do creative work.
And let's send them to work with a thumb drive.
Strangely enough, they don't go to work with a thumb drive and sit on a shared computer and try to work on the bank of doing that. They have specialist software that they need on their thing. And by the way, just in case you don't think that your child can actually use that specialist software, get your child to show you a graphics program that they use, one that you probably may have sent some of your workers on a 5-day training course at significant expense to, and just see whether or not you can get your child to show you 3 or 4 things that you don't know is on there, and that child has probably picked it up entirely on their own. These are children that are comfortable, and by the way, they are doing knowledge work. When they go to school, they are knowledge workers. And if you don't believe that, and you don't think a laptop program is about producing knowledge workers with the tools and the skills for tomorrow's tasks, then perhaps you better think about what school you've chosen to send your child to. Strangely enough, it's gone very quiet in the paper on that. We haven't had any more articles now criticising. I still believe that those 2 heads of those schools owe me a bit of a thank you for that one. I'm still waiting for my phone to ring.
One of the other arguments I got, when, as I said, we sort of looked at the one-to-one, every kid with a laptop idea, 10 years ago. And the boss that I was working for at the time, his big issue was equity. He said, how can we can't afford to put laptops in the hands of every kid just yet. And how do we transition into that by only putting it into the hands of some? Because how do we say to some parents that your child's getting... We weren't allowed to say a better education. We had to only use the term a different education. But, I think we all knew that what we were aiming for was to try and provide a better education.
Look, if I can address that point, Ken Rowe, who is now with the Australian Council for Education Research. Ken was the head of Frankston at the time they introduced a program like that, and they realised this is a senior high school in Melbourne. This is a government high school. We're not talking about a private school, but Ken had a real vision for one-to-one technology, and he grappled with this issue as well. And he basically said, look, we can understand that. We understand some parents don't believe in it. It'll be fine. What we will do is we will try to separate your children and have a class of the laptop children and the non-laptop children, and we won't in any way restrict anybody. We'll make whatever class wants to be. This is all about choice. So they had 2 streams, and to my knowledge they continue to have 2 streams at Frankston Senior High School in Melbourne. It's been very, very successful at having that model. The program has gone ahead very, very well. Personally, I'm glad that we didn't have to go down that pathway. I mean, ours was entirely all of the kids. The interesting thing that we had was these children that were turning up with the parents that were saying can't afford, don't want to afford, that sort of stuff. We said fine, no trouble. We had the second-hand laptops. As I said, that wasn't very successful in terms of the fact that it set up the social divide, which I didn't like. But I think in the first year we had a cohort of 150 kids that were going into our program. In the first year we had I think 30 to 35 second-hand laptops in the school. I think if you go there today, there are none. The parents' belief in the program and the way the program was implemented was such that the parents did everything they possibly could to get hold of it. And I always put some money in the budget to actually buy some of these new computers and put them in the hands of the kids. And I'm going to get caught for saying this, but I would find a way to make sure that the kids had a new computer and nobody knew about it. But I'm sure if Jeff finds out that I did that, he probably won't mind. But I've got a very strong social issue that says that every kid should have a good state-of-the-art computer and be able to use that, regardless of whose pocket it came out of.
Yeah. Is there, I know schools put a lot of money and time and effort into maintaining your infrastructure, and then they go and provide PCs on top of that. And I know you said before this is not just about saving money by not providing PCs in classrooms, but what sort of how does it work if you were to take the PCs out of the equation and the school's responsibility was to provide infrastructure, to provide the servers and the back end to drive the stuff to provide resources to students, and they then provided the machines to access those resources? Is that a model that you were kind of looking at?
That's exactly the model we went down. That's exactly the way it worked. Now, of course, the skeptics out there say, well, the school's going to save money on this program. It is not about saving money. You have to be aware that
no, and that's not the reason you do it. But
no.
How does the money work in that case? Would you actually save money or not?
No, you don't. You don't. Definitely not. The money goes in other ways. You just allocate your resources differently. That's the way it works. We increased our budget. We definitely increased the budget by quite a bit, obviously to set up the infrastructure and to do all sorts of bits and pieces like that. The sceptical parents amongst us, amongst the school, turned around and said, oh, this is all about saving the school money. And I was, more than happy. I invited them in and said, look, can I show you my budget allocation? Can I show you where the money is spent? But, nobody took me up on the invitation, but they're more than welcome to see just exactly where the money was allocated. I'm incredibly open about that. What happened was we had to set up certain bits of, we had to set up the infrastructure. I mean, you've got wireless routers and that sort of stuff right throughout the whole of the campus, your wireless hubs, your network, all that sort of stuff has to be set up. But also, the thing is that every computer manufacturer out there will say that the battery technology is getting better, and just like Fusion, you know how Fusion is only 50 years off, and it's always been 50 years off. We will have fusion power in 50 years. There's no doubt about it. Now, I'm old and crusty enough to know that I've been hearing that for 25 years, and it's still 50 years off. Yep. But batteries that will last all day in a laptop are also just a few years around the corner, Chris.
And they have been for a long time, Paul.
They have been for a very, very long time, and they'll continue to be for a long time because, as you'll see from kids using this, the minute that you actually have something that supplies more batteries, they will invent something that plugs in a USB port that drains even more batteries from it. Yeah. Because, we had kids plugging fans in, the mice that you can get that light up with all sorts of colours and play tunes. There's an incredible number of things that can plug in and drain your battery power, no matter how good your battery power is. So it's always going to be a problem. So you really have to put power in rooms, and that's one of the issues that we had as well. We had to make sure that we had power outlets, because these aren't executives. These kids bringing this along, you're saying to them, believe in us that we can make you work all day long, and and that you'll be doing really creative, fantastic things whenever you open your laptop, and that power and things like that won't be an issue. And so the last thing you want is to be dealing with these things. And yes, you can say to the kid, it is your responsibility to bring it charged up and that sort of stuff. But great. But what happens when Jimmy, who basically really doesn't want to do his maths homework or his maths work, and he's not failing, I mean, he's not really getting a lot of great self-esteem in his maths class, he's going to turn up and now his laptop's flat. How are you going to deal with it? I mean, when you could just plug it in. So let's just plug it in and get on with it, basically set up that infrastructure. But along with that infrastructure, you need people. Human resources are the best thing you can invest in. And we at All Saints, we're incredibly fortunate to be able to attract some of the best people that I've ever worked with as support teams. These people were human beings. They liked talking to other teachers. They liked working with kids with problems with laptops. They were approachable. They went out of their way. They didn't walk out at 4:30 when they knocked off. They were in classrooms talking to the kids that had problems during the day. These were incredible people that were just, I've just got to pay tribute to my team. They were just the best people. And one particular person, Donna Hatton, was our front lady. She was our help desk lady. And Donna was just so good because she was, the kids would always be in at our help centre, not because they had a problem with their laptop, but because they wanted to chat to Donna. She was just a really nice person. So none of these kids were frightened to go to her or say about their problems with the laptops or whatever. They were just there. She was a great friend and asset to the school. And Donna's still there. And I'll tell you what, the day that Donna leaves All Saints, there'll be a bump in the laptop program because she's such a great person.
So put some numbers on this for me. So you had how many kids at the school?
In total, the school's got 1,500 kids.
Right, so fairly big. And,
fairly.
And you implemented it in grade 5 and grade 8 to start with?
Correct.
I'm presuming the 5s went to 6 and the 6s went to 7s and the 8s went to 9s and the 9s went to 10s and so on. Now, is it throughout the whole school now?
Exactly. We had some bumps, as I referred to earlier, in our Year 5 program. I spoke about getting on the bus and really, I guess, down in Year 5, they didn't really believe in buses. Probably ferries or trains were really good, or skate, but it was slightly different. I won't go there because that's for another podcast, perhaps. But for whatever reason, we abandoned it in Year 5, 6, and no, we kept it in 7. So the laptop program now at All Saints goes from Year 7 through to officially it goes from Year 7 through to Year 10. So there are 4 years.
Right.
But most of what we do in Western Australia is we say to children, you've of course got all the changes that are going on in Western Australia at the moment, and you've got to realise I'm now 2 years away from it. Yep. But there's new courses of study coming in and those sorts of things. But going back to the old model, there were TEE courses and non-TEE courses that the kids could actually sit for. And a lot of the kids were doing a mix. Some of them were doing TEE for university entrance, and they were doing a whole lot of non-TEE for TAFE entrance. So we made it optional for the children from Year 11 to bring the laptops. So basically they were compulsory from Year 7 through to Year 10, and then optional from Year 11 to Year 12. And I guess as a measure of success, and I as I said, I'm 2 years out of it, but I'd be guessing that most of the kids, I'd say 90% of the kids at All Saints today would be arriving with a laptop in Year 11 and Year 12.
It's funny you should say that, because I've spoken to numbers of schools who have implemented a laptop program and they've focused on 7 to 10, which is high school in New South Wales. But in grade 11 and 12, when they get to the HSC, there's 2 senior years, they don't make it compulsory there, but the reasoning I've always been given is, well, they get enough of the computing stuff in 7 to 10. By the time they get to 11 and 12, they have to really concentrate on learning. I'm thinking, which bit of this have they missed?
Well, look, just to sort of defend that position for a little while, it's not really the fault of the teacher or the school. It's the fault of an education system that basically says to them that computers and new knowledge has no place in this exam.
No,
I mean,
all about
basically, Well, exactly. I mean, as a physics teacher, I've taught physics for more years than than I care to recall. But basically, there is nothing on that physics exam paper that dates from any more modern than about 1905. Well, it's true. That's what it is. So basically, if you don't want to get confused about nuclear fusion, you don't want to know about magnetic levitated trains that are out there that are actually doing things. You don't really want to know how an iPod works, or how a hard disk platter works. You don't really want to know about magnetic domains and why things are shrinking down to the fact that we can walk around with a flash drive in our back pocket that has more information than the first computer you bought could ever store on it. So basically, you don't want to know any of this because it is not relevant to passing the exam. The exam is not about real knowledge. It's about how much history of science, particularly in the physics courses, I know that most closely. The exam is, how much of the history of physics you can possibly cram into your head and put down on a piece of paper.
Yep, that's
and it's
what
got
it
nothing.
boils down to. And it's the system that's the problem.
Yeah. I was going to say, I would say it would be the same in most subject areas. It has nothing to do with, critical thinking, new knowledge. It has entirely to do with historical viewpoints. For God's sake, here I am in Hong Kong. I mean, I'm sure these kids in Hong Kong are going to sit exams where they have to recall all of the Tudor kings. And yet, as I said before, they're living in an environment where they don't even question the fact that they use a dryer in an apartment block every day, or that they walk in and turn the air conditioning on, and we have a quality of air that's absolutely pathetic here. Now, for me, as a social issue, I would be turning around teaching the kids about power stations. I'd be teaching the kids about burning brown coal and why it produces this sort of haze that's here, and I'd be looking at them doing an audit of their energy reserves and how much they could save, and how many power stations they could do without if they didn't have air conditioners flat out. But anyway, I'm off topic. Sorry, Chris, but
you couldn't do that. That might be useful.
And they might be able to use a laptop to do it as well.
Well, mate, we've covered a bit of stuff. We've been talking for a while. So is there anything else you want to finish up with?
No, I think I've done the same to you again, Chris. Unfortunately, I've given you a big editing job of trying to get this down to something reasonable.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Look, everything you say makes a lot of sense, and I think it's a really chicken and egg issue, this idea of trying to get this one-to-one access within a school, because I think, as you've just hit on right at the end there's a whole lot of things that the underlying system wants to support technology in education, but at the same time wants to hang on to the past and say, "Oh, hang on, maybe content's really more important than process."
Look,
and it's contradictory.
Who was it came up with that great statement that basically, with the amount of knowledge and information in the world, we can only ever hope to teach children in a K-12 school something like about 5% of that knowledge, and yet we argue almost to the death over that 5% and what that 5% should be.
Yeah. And the truth of it is that whatever we teach them, a lot of it will be out of date by the time they come to use it anyway. And really, the only skill that we really need to teach them is to learn how to learn.
It's spoken like a true educator.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing those words of wisdom. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and what I really like about the stuff that Paul was talking about, it's not about the technology, it's not about the laptops, it's about the learning. It's about using these things as tools so that the kids in our classrooms learn better and learn more relevantly. Is that a word, relevantly? Anyway, I just used it. I'd just like to thank everyone who's been a part of the virtual staff room over the last couple of months, both the people who have kindly offered to talk to me, and also everyone who's listening and giving some wonderful feedback on what we've been doing here. This whole thing started as a bit of an experiment, but it's been, I think, very productive, and I don't know about you guys, I certainly got a lot out of it, simply as the guy who puts it together, and for me it's worth doing just on that level. But it's nice to hear from people occasionally to say that they're also getting something out of it, so I do thank you very much for it. It's Christmas Day here in Canada, and I'm wondering why I'm doing this on a Christmas Day. My family flew back to Australia on Wednesday, and so they're all back home. So I'm sitting here about to go to a Christmas dinner, but I thought I'd squeeze in this quick edit and get it out onto the net, and this will be the last one, obviously, for this year. Again, thank you for listening. Your comments are always welcome. You can always call in on Sydney number 8011 4244 if you'd like to leave an audio comment. We're happy to play that on the air. Otherwise, just leave us a comment in the blog. Till then, have a wonderful Christmas, have a safe New Year, and we'll see you when we get back. My name is Chris Betcher, and you've been listening to the Virtual Staff Room.